Most people think removing toxic people requires big confrontations, dramatic exits, or long emotional speeches. But the truth is quieter. You don't always need to explain yourself to protect your peace. Sometimes the most powerful boundary isn't spoken, it's lived. And once you understand how to do that, the people who drain you naturally drift out on their own. Most people think that removing someone toxic requires a dramatic conversation where you list every reason you're done. But the truth is, toxic people aren't persuaded by explanations. They're persuaded by consequences. When your behavior changes, when your patterns shift, when you stop feeding the dynamic they rely on, they feel that change far louder than anything you could say. Actions are clarity. They cut through confusion. When someone is used to you giving in, showing up, or fixing things, silence backed by consistent behavior says everything they need to hear. Consistency is the key. One silent action doesn't move a toxic person. They see it as temporary. They assume they can pull you back with the same guilt, pressure, or manipulation they've used before. But when you remove the emotional yes behind your behavior, when you stop rewarding the cycle with attention, you're teaching them a new reality without ever opening your mouth. People learn who they are to you by how you treat them repeatedly, not how you treat them once. Your new consistency becomes the boundary they can't argue with. When your actions shift, the dynamic shifts. Toxic people thrive on reaction, your anger, your defense, your emotional involvement. When you no longer react and you simply behave differently, it takes away their favorite tool, control. They can't escalate with you if you don't join the escalation. They can't hook you with chaos if you don't step into the mess. They can't twist your words if you don't offer any. That's the power of quiet boundaries. You're not withdrawing to punish them. You're withdrawing to protect yourself. Every time you choose not to engage in their drama, you're saying something. Every time you show calm instead of reacting, you're saying something. Every time you don't answer immediately, don't explain yourself, don't argue back, and don't compensate for their behavior, you're rewriting the entire script of that relationship. And people notice that shift. Even the most self-absorbed person eventually realizes when access is no longer what it used to be. They feel the distance first, and if you stay consistent, they adjust to it, whether they want to or not. The most important part is that your behavior is not a performance. You can't do it for a week and expect years of toxicity to unravel. Silent boundaries only work when you hold them because they reflect your actual emotional decision, not a temporary reaction. When you finally understand that protecting your peace doesn't require permission, you become less apologetic, less available, and less willing to negotiate with disrespect. You don't owe anyone a speech for choosing yourself. You owe yourself the consistency of following through. In the end, toxic people remove themselves when there's nothing left for them to feed on. Not because you fought them, not because you convinced them, but because you showed them through quiet, steady action that you're no longer playing the part they assigned you. And the moment your behavior no longer supports their pattern, the pattern collapses. That's how you remove toxic people without saying a word. Your silence isn't avoidance, it's strength, it's clarity, and it's the boundary they'll hear long after you've walked away. Emotional detachment is one of the strongest boundaries you can set because it takes away the one thing toxic people rely on, your emotional availability. They don't need your agreement to keep the cycle going. They just need your energy. Every reaction, every defense, every explanation is fuel. When you detach, you cut off the fuel without ever raising your voice. You're not cold, you're not punishing, you're simply not investing anymore. And that shift is powerful because it's invisible at first, but undeniable over time. Most people think detachment means ignoring someone or pretending not to care. It's not that. Detachment is choosing not to be emotionally pulled by the behaviors that used to hook you. It's responding with clarity instead of reacting from hurt. It's letting someone be upset without rushing to fix it. It's observing instead of absorbing. This is a skill, and it takes practice, especially when someone is used to pushing your buttons. But once you learn to sit with your emotions instead of handing them over, the dynamic changes quietly and completely. Toxic people try to create emotional imbalance because that's where they feel the most control. They poke at insecurities, they start unnecessary arguments, they use silence as punishment, they play confused when you set expectations. All of this is designed to get a rise out of you. The moment you stop rising, the entire strategy collapses. They can't manipulate someone who won't participate in the emotional game. And when you stop participating, you give yourself space to finally think clearly again. When you detach emotionally, you're not shutting down. You're choosing what deserves your inner peace. You're making a choice to protect your mental clarity. You no longer jump in to defend your intentions or chase their approval. You allow their reactions to be their responsibility. And the more you do this, the more you realize you are carrying emotional weight that wasn't yours to hold. Detachment creates room for self-respect because you stop fighting battles that don't lead to any real change. The interesting thing is that toxic people notice emotional detachment faster than they notice physical distance. You can see someone less often and they might ignore it. But when the emotional charge they depend on disappears, they immediately feel that something has shifted. They'll try harder at first. More pressure, more guilt, more attempts to provoke you. This isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign the dynamic is losing power. Staying steady through that phase is the most important part because your calm is creating a boundary they can't cross. Eventually, the relationship rearranges itself because it has to. A toxic person either steps back, steps out, or exposes themselves in a way you can no longer ignore. And the best part is that you didn't have to argue to get there. You didn't have to justify your decision or convince them to treat you differently. Your detachment did the work for you. You stopped letting their behavior dictate your emotional temperature. You reclaimed control of your inner world. And once that happens, removing toxic people becomes natural, not emotional. You don't push them out. You simply stop giving them a place that requires your emotional presence, and they eventually drift to where their tactics still work. That's what emotional detachment really is, the quiet freedom of choosing yourself. Reactivity is the doorway toxic people walk through every time. They depend on your instant response, your defensiveness, your need to explain yourself, because it keeps the dynamic alive. When you stop reacting and start becoming unavailable, everything changes. Unavailability isn't about punishing anyone. It's about protecting your mental space. It's choosing not to jump every time someone snaps their fingers. And when you make your presence something that must be earned, not demanded, you silently communicate a boundary that lands deeper than any speech you could give. Being unavailable doesn't mean disappearing or going silent without reason. It means you stop being emotionally accessible on command. You don't rush to reply the moment they message you. You don't respond to guilt trips. You don't get dragged into arguments that go nowhere. You move at your own pace instead of the pace they try to force on you. And because you're not reacting instantly, you create a gap, a space where you can think clearly instead of being pushed into emotional decisions. That space is where your power lives. Toxic people rely on urgency. They create emotional emergencies to pull you in. They want you flustered, overwhelmed, unsure of yourself, because that's when you're easiest to control. But when you become unavailable to chaos, urgency loses its grip. You realize that not everything needs your immediate attention. Not every message deserves a response. Not every tone deserves your energy. When someone who thrives on emotional shortcuts can't reach you instantly, they lose access to the version of you they've been manipulating. When you stop reacting, you start observing. You see patterns you couldn't see when you were caught up in the emotional rush. You notice the way conversations always go in circles. You notice how the tone changes when you don't give them what they want right away. You notice the pressure they use, the guilt they lean on, the way they escalate when they don't get instant compliance. And the more you observe, the clearer it becomes. The relationship only worked when you were available on their terms, not yours. Making yourself less reactive also reminds you of your worth. Someone else's urgency is not your responsibility. Someone else's frustration is not your problem to fix. You don't owe anyone emotional access just because they demand it. You start choosing where your time goes, where your attention goes, and where your peace goes. And when you treat your attention like something valuable, people who don't respect it automatically fall out of your life, not because you push them, but because you stopped offering unlimited access. Eventually, the dynamic with a toxic person shifts because it has to. They can't hold the same power over someone who no longer reacts on command. They can't pull you back into a cycle when you don't engage with it anymore. The more unavailable you become to drama, chaos, and manipulation, the more they realize their usual strategies no longer work. And that's when they either change, retreat, or expose themselves completely. You didn't confront them. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You simply removed their access to your reactions. And in doing so, you removed their ability to control the relationship. That's how unavailability becomes one of the quietest and most powerful tools you have. Controlling your access instead of controlling someone's behavior is one of the cleanest, most effective ways to remove toxic people without ever saying a word. The thing about toxic individuals is that they thrive on pulling you into fixing, negotiating, or managing their emotions. They want you to try to change them because that keeps you invested. But the moment you stop trying to change them and instead focus on what you allow into your space, the dynamic starts to break down. You can't control who someone is, but you have full control over how close they get to you. Most of the chaos in toxic relationships comes from trying to make someone understand what they refuse to understand. You repeat yourself. You try to be clearer. You try to communicate in a way that finally gets through to them. And all that energy goes nowhere. But when you shift from trying to change their behavior to adjusting your own availability, the frustration disappears. You're no longer waiting for them to treat you right. You're deciding how much of your life they get access to. That's a completely different kind of power, and it doesn't require a single argument. Limiting your access can be subtle or direct, but it's always consistent. It looks like taking longer to respond because you're not emotionally tied to their urgency. It looks like not initiating the conversations that drain you. It looks like saying less, sharing less, and investing less. You don't cut them off immediately. You simply stop giving them the premium version of you. Toxic people know when the access they used to have is no longer there. They feel the shift instantly, even when you haven't spoken a word. The beauty of controlling access is that it avoids drama. You're not telling them what they're doing wrong. You're not asking for change they were never going to give. You're not giving them ammunition to twist your words or flip the narrative. You're just quietly adjusting the door that leads to you. And once the door narrows, the behavior around you changes naturally. Some people step back because the access isn't effortless anymore. Others expose their entitlement because they don't like losing privileges they never earned. Either way, you get clarity. The more you control your access, the more you protect your emotional bandwidth. Your peace isn't up for negotiation. You choose who disrupts it and who doesn't. And when you get intentional about that, the people who bring stress instead of support gradually fall away. They don't leave because you confronted them. They leave because the relationship no longer serves their needs. They were attached to the version of you that tolerated everything. When that version disappears, so does the connection. And it happens quietly without any explosive ending. Eventually, controlling your access becomes a natural part of how you live. You realize you don't owe anyone unlimited space in your life just because they demand it. You stop trying to change people who don't want to change. You stop giving explanations to people who aren't listening. You stop offering emotional access to people who don't respect it. And without any dramatic goodbye, anyone who isn't healthy for you fades out because you stopped giving them the control they depended on. That's how you remove toxic people silently, not by changing them, but by choosing yourself every time. Redirecting your energy toward environments that support you is the quiet shift that makes toxic people fall away without a single confrontation. When you focus on healthier spaces, healthier habits, and healthier people, you naturally have less room for the ones who drain you. It's not about ignoring them or forcing distance. It's about filling your life with things that make you stronger. And when your energy starts going to what builds you instead of what breaks you, the relationships that were held together by emotional obligation begin to loosen on their own. Most toxic dynamics only stay alive because you give them the time and attention they require. They feed on your involvement, your caretaking, your emotional resources. But when those resources get redirected to things that benefit you, your growth, your boundaries, your peace, there's none left for the chaos. You don't have to announce anything. You don't have to justify your shift. The simple act of pouring your energy into what nourishes you sends a message far louder than any explanation ever could. Toxic people notice when they're no longer the center of your emotional world. Redirecting your energy also restores your sense of clarity. When you're surrounded by healthier environments, you start to feel the difference between calm and chaos. You realize how often you were in reaction mode. You see how drained you felt after every interaction with toxic people. And the more time you spend in supportive spaces, whether that's being around genuine friends, working on personal goals, or just choosing peaceful routines, the harder it becomes to tolerate environments that pull you backward. Your standards quietly rise, and not everyone rises with them. One of the most powerful parts of shifting your energy is that you stop needing closure from the people who hurt you. You stop waiting for them to apologize or understand your point of view. Instead, you create a life where their behavior simply doesn't fit anymore. It becomes irrelevant. The more your life expands in healthy directions, the smaller their influence becomes. And eventually, the dynamic fades because it no longer matches the person you're becoming. That's the silent exit you've been searching for, not walking away from them, but walking toward the version of you that doesn't need their approval or attention. People who genuinely support you will meet you where you're growing. They'll encourage it. But toxic people only want access to the version of you that tolerated their behavior. When they feel you pulling your energy away from them and toward environments that strengthen you, they react with resistance. Not because they care about your growth, but because they're losing the part of you that catered to their needs. Stay steady through that shift. Your new direction isn't about them. It's about reclaiming your emotional bandwidth and putting it into spaces that give back instead of drain. Eventually, redirecting your energy creates the quiet separation you've needed all